All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Tuesday, June the 16th council agenda. Could I have approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to approve with a second. With no dissension, we'll let the minutes stand as read. Madam Clerk, we have some ordinances on final reading concerning planning. We won't read each one of those, but does any council person have a question or comment about any of the planning items for today's final reading? And let me fix my screen so I can see hands. Okay. All right. All right. I see no hands. Where is Councilman? There he is. Councilman Oglesby.
I'm here.
All right. We were just going over planning items. Well, I'm sorry. Yours is on first reading. I'll pick it up in a minute.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Madam Clerk, let's drop down to 6A, ordinances on first reading.
Okay. I apologize. 6A. Perfect. Okay. All right. An ordinance hereinafter also known as the fiscal year 2020 to 2021 operations budget, providing revenue for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020 and ending June 30th, 2021, appropriating same to the payment of expenses of the municipal government, fixing the rate of taxation on all taxable property in the city and the time taxes and privileges are due, how they shall be paid, where they shall become delinquent, when they shall become delinquent, providing for interest and penalty on delinquent taxes and privileges, amending Chattanooga City Code Part 2, Chapter 2, Section 2-267, relative to paid leave for active duty training, and to amend Chattanooga City Code Part 2, Chapter 31, Sections 31 through 36, 31 through 37, 31 through 41, and 31 through 43, Sections 31-322 and 31-354. An ordinance, I'm sorry?
Okay, well, go ahead.
An ordinance, oh, that's the alternate version.
That's the alternate version. I think the heading is the same.
Yes.
Do we have any questions, council, concerning the original or the alternate version that is on tonight's agenda? Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So make sure I understand this correctly. The alternate version that is on here has an additional item not in writing affecting 911.
Councilman, I'll tell you what, we're going to bring Ms. Sullivan on to answer that question. To be honest, at this point, I'm not sure what's on there and what's not. Miss Lydia, could you bring Ms. Sullivan in, please?
Yes, sir. She's on her way.
Hi, Mara.
Hello.
Did you hear the councilman's question?
I did. It was about 911 and whether or not the change in funding for 911 is in the alternate version. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it is.
It's in there. And can you read that clause so that we understand what it reads again, please?
Absolutely. I don't have that document right here in front of me. I apologize, but the change in the budget is that it is flat funding for 911 from last year's funding amount. The 911 board had asked for an additional funding increase of $85,997, if my memory serves correctly. And we chose to fund all of our agencies this year with flat funding, and in looking back, seeing that 911 we had funded the increase, we went back in with this pass on the budget, and we are funding that agency as flat funding like all of our other agencies. We did not decrease it like we did most of our agencies, but we are funding it with flat funding, similar to how we did with CARTA.
So the original version has an $85,000 increase in it.
Yes, sir.
For 911. And what was the reason for that increase?
It was, the information from 911 is that it was based on calls of service.
Calls of service.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right. So the increase in calls of service have gone up, which I can completely understand. So the 85,000 is in answer to that.
Yes, sir.
So would I be safe to assume that by not doing that, we might lose service to the people who this may be their only lifeline?
Well, it's everyone's lifeline. 911 is for everyone. It's not just for some, but it. I don't think that the 911 board will do that. I mean, it's certainly part of the. It is a contract. I don't think that the 911 board will ask us to withdraw. That's we've discussed it with council, and this is a unique time in our city's history. The clause, there is a clause in the 911 contract that does allow for funding as available, and we just simply do not have available funds right now. We have, as I've said, cut every agency. We are at least keeping this one steady funding year over year, and we hope to be able to do better next year if our revenues rebound.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let me switch back. Councilwoman Burrs.
Yes. So as I said at the beginning of the earlier meeting, the basis for the meeting we had this afternoon was to discuss with new information any questions we had about the changes in the budget or the alternate budget. And I think we covered that. And so I'm assuming, Mr. Chair, and my job is to move the budget, as I said earlier, and either I get a second or I don't, and either it passes or it doesn't. I'm assuming that it's the alternate budget, since that's what we worked on today. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
Okay, I'm not following your question. Is it my understanding? I think Councilman Ledford was asking about the funding for 911 in the alternate
Right, and I
version.
moved to a new topic.
Okay, what's your new topic?
Well, I believe Councilman Ledford were you through, Councilman Ledford?
Yes, ma'am. I understand the situation with 911.
So mine's a different one.
Okay.
And it's on this topic, the budget. And in between last week and this week, the mayor came forward with an alternate budget that took into consideration much of the input. And as a result of that, some of the conversation today during the budget education session changed, and there were a lot of questions which were answered. My question to you is, given that, I need some direction. Let me finish. Given the direction, I'm moving the alternate version.
All I can tell you, Councilwoman, is if you're going to make the motion, and you're telling me now that you want to make that motion, I think
It's my job to do it, and I will do it. Normally, what we do is we decide which version. It doesn't have to be budget. It can be anything. We can go one of two ways. I can move the regular one, and if it goes down, then move the alternate one, or move the alternate one. I believe that council got enough information to, since they're both on here, to move the alternate one. Is that the wish of the council?
Well,
I don't know what the vote's going to be, sir.
That's correct, and I think maybe we never took a consensus on which version that we would like to take action on tonight, but we could do that, I guess, right now. I could ask, is it the will of the council that we take action on the alternate version tonight? Is that what the council would like to do? Take action on the alternate version? And by consensus, Let me just put it this way. Is there any objection to moving the alternate version? Let me put it that way. Councilwoman, I hear no objection from the council to move the alternate version tonight.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is there any other questions? I want to make sure the council has all their questions answered about the 911 before I do have a question. Okay.
Yeah.
You got, huh? You got your hand up?
Well, I'm trying to get, I'm not used to this new computer. Wait a minute.
Well, it don't matter. Just go ahead, Councilman. It doesn't matter.
So on this,
Ask you.
are we voting tonight on the alternate or not the alternate?
It was my understanding by no one's objection that we would vote on the alternate version tonight.
We will vote on the alternate version.
We will vote, we'll take action on the alternate version of the budget tonight.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Now, any other questions about, okay. So Mara, the $85,000, I guess, this is what I'm concerned about. It was in the original budget, correct? The 85,000?
Yes, sir, it was.
So at some point, when the mayor submitted the budget, he felt it was important to include the 85,000. There must have been a recognized need for that 85,000 in 911, correct?
It came as part of the contract, and so it was advanced just as part of that. But we, as I said, when we were going through our final look at the budget documents and we saw that this agency had an increase, and that is not in keeping with our other agency increases, we decided, since we had this opportunity to make changes in the budget, we decided to change our course and to not have an increase for this agency in keeping with our other agency work.
Okay, and so we're certain by taking this $85,000 out that that will cause no liability to the city, and it will not result in an unfavorable outcome to any of our citizens because we have taken this money out of 911. Can you confirm that?
I can confirm that I've talked with our legal department about the contract, and it appears from the contract having the stipulation that if there are financial difficulties that we, which we do have now, that we can maintain our association with 911.
And will we be able to maintain our level of service that we have offered to the citizens of Chattanooga with this $85,000 removed from the budget?
I believe that we would have the same level of service that we had last year, since the data that they provided us is based upon last year's calls. So I would assume that we would have the same level of service that we had last year.
But we're not for certain then.
Well, no, I mean, we funded them with this amount of money, and those were the level of calls that they answered last year, because that's what the data is based on. So that's
okay. So I've got some hands up now, so I'm gonna just take them in the order that they appear. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. My hand was actually up about before you started about the 911. Like and once Russell seemed to be a little agitated about the vote, I just want to hear like the thoughts and concerns about the passing the second budget. Like, what's going on with it? Is it something we need to talk about or, address right now about it? So we can get it cleared by Mara, the people that's on, so we won't be coming in at 6 o'clock, going back and forth about which budget need to be passed.
Who is your question directed to, Councilwoman Coonrod?
To you and Russell Gilbert, because both of you seem a little agitated about it or something.
I'm agitated for a different reason than which budget we're voting on.
Okay.
You can add me in there as agitated. So.
Councilman Gilbert, did you have a concern about voting on the alternate version?
No, I was just asking to make sure I was clear which one we're gonna vote on.
Okay. So I heard no objections, Councilwoman Coonrod, to taking action on the alternate version tonight at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Unless you want to voice some concern at this time.
Now, I'm just making sure that, you know, I was hearing my colleague concerns, but since you're saying that it's about something else, then okay.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, Councilman Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. And Chairperson, I just have to ask this question. Definitely understand your concerns about the $80,000 being there and more. This, I guess, to you too. And now with the alternate version, it's not there. They have, you know, took it to somewhere else, or they've moved it. I have to say that with the police department, it was $120,000 there. Why was it moved? And so you seem fit for it to be there first, now you don't. So that's the same as the 911 center. Is the chief's office going to be able to run efficiently without that $120,000? Then I also have to look at the fact that we're taking, it seemed fit for McCamey to be under police. Now it's not. It seemed fit for this. So all of those things kind of fall into that, you know, same question, that the budget they presented to us in the first was something that they feel strong about. And I think because of the unrest of our community right now, they had to find ways and ask people to sacrifice, to say, hey, you're going to have to sacrifice probably even more than you've already sacrificed because of COVID due to the unrest of our city. And you created this other budget to try to appease us, the community. Is that safe to say, or am I wrong?
Who is your question directed to? Mara?
I think the statement was like all of the, I'm gonna say to Mara, because the statement was like outside of Chip, outside of taking money from the 911 center, all of it, taking money from the chief's budget, from the 30,000 that came from something. I think those budget line items was there first. So all of them play a role to why was it changed. And I think, and I'm asking Mara, that was done to appease the unrest that's going in our city, to show that we're listening and we hear what's going on. Is that accurate to say? And some agencies had to sacrifice other than others, more than others.
Yes, sir. There's been a lot of shared sacrifice in this budget, over and beyond the alternative budget that was proposed. I mean, let's remember we had $1 million cut to police before we even started this year.
Right.
We have an $8.4 million decrease in revenues this year. And we have lots of agencies that asked for additional dollars, lots of new agencies with great ideas that asked for dollars that we weren't able to fund. And seeing this in the same way, I mean, it's shared sacrifice for all of us as we're moving through this COVID revenue crisis that we're in. And I believe that that our 911 calls were answered in this previous year with the amount of dollars that they functioned on, and believe that they can. I mean, let's look at the amount of dollars that we fund them at now, the level that we fund them at now, and I believe that we're in a good place and can continue forward.
Did that answer your question, Councilman Byrd? Or
Yeah.
good. Miss Lydia,
Yes, sir.
Miss Daisy Madison had her hand up just a few minutes ago. I think she wanted to comment. Would you go ahead and bring her on while I bring in Councilman Ledford, please?
Yes, sir.
Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we heard in discussion at 1 o'clock was concerns about the effectiveness of the department that has been created. And I would really like to hear from my colleagues who spoke up at 1 o'clock, because you had some very insightful things to say and very opinionated things to say that I think we need to hear again right now, because regarding whether or not this change to the budget is actually going to solve any of our problems. And I would love to hear from those of you who spoke up to talk about this one last time in this session. if you would.
Councilman Gilbert has his hand up, and I think he spoke during that session. Councilman Gilbert, you want to address that?
Yes, sir. I think the conversation been talking about 911. As you noticed, when we had our budget earlier this year, I mentioned about why are we funding them more money because of the issues and concerns we had last year. We just had the executive CEO on a few minutes ago, and he just said that we are making some big strides 2 years ago. Well, this incident happened last year. So your stride is not working. So why are we trying to fund you any more money that you have concern? I have concern about you not treating your employees with dignity, treating your employees where they can feel free to say or speak. They're frightened right now. And some of these employees, like you say last year, Councilman Chip Anderson, that's our employees, and they have no voice. And that's the reason why I'm pushing that we should not fund them far as any addition at all. I want to defund them because of how they are treating people of color currently. Because again, he said 2 years ago, and the incident happened last year. And we had them we had them at city council to answer questions. 1 minute, he don't have a personnel HR. The next minute, he's using the Hamilton County HR. Which one is it? So yeah, I brought that up again.
Okay. Thank you. Councilwoman Coonrod? Is that an old hand?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to speak about a few things. I mean, I hear you, Russell. And the reality about that is that that's not just happening at the 911 center, if that's happening, but it's happening all over in departments for city government. So that's an issue we need to be discussed across the board. And if we're gonna hold 911 accountable, we gotta start holding everybody else accountable. We keep picking and choosing which ones we want to say, okay, it's okay for you to suppress the voice of employees under this department, but we gonna get on you for the 911. It's happening. I'm about what's fair, but that seemed like that's an HR type situation, not dealing with the budget. And I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying as far as defunding. Are you meaning like you really want to get rid of the 911 without roll with them? Are you saying like, hey, I think that money should be removed and invested to some other area?
Can I answer that question?
Go ahead, Councilman Gilbert.
Well, remember last year, Councilwoman, that I said, why are we paying $5 million in 911? We're the only government individuals that are spending that type of money. You know, it's funny that we're spending $5 million plus versus Hamilton County spending a lot less. Well, we pay both taxes. And why are they paying less and we paying more? No one never answered that question, never said, well, this is the reason why, of my opinion. So okay. I'm looking at that, why would we give them more money and really not have an answer to what the money they already received?
All
right, and then to what Darren said, like for me, and I'll speak to it again. Like I'm really grateful and thankful that, our administration took another look at what we could do. Those are temporary type fixes, but not fixes that what we really need to see that's going to address the problem. The true problem is the injustices that's happening, the racism that's going on, and we got to tackle that from a policy level because it's structural, institutional, internalized. Like it's all that I can go on. But for us, we gonna have to fight that beast at a whole nother perspective and looking at the different policies. That's how we gonna make a bigger impact. And it's not gonna take just moving those things. It's a start of a conversation that I do hope that's gonna continue. Even when the next administration come in, I hope they will be willing to, tackle this same issue. It's not gonna stop now. And all of us that'll be on council, and I hope we're still willing to take on it, because That's what it's gonna do to change. Black people still having the same conversations back when Martin Luther King did the Poor People Campaign. And we don't want to talk about it, but it's the truth. It's the truth. And that when will we, you know, start doing what we have to do as a people? And I know a lot of people may not agree with me, but I'm okay with that. I ain't never been the type person that want to follow somebody else. I'm that person that's gonna speak to it and say what's right. It don't matter. We champion a fight that is, if the person ain't willing to change their mind and their heart, it ain't nothing we gonna be able to do. Even if we structure this whole budget, it still ain't gonna prevent the acts that's happening towards Black people. It's just not gonna do it. And we gotta be honest in what we're really doing and what we asking for about it. It's a small piece of the conversation, but I really, you know, for me, policy changes. That's what I want to see happen.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Byrd, before I go to you, let me go to Councilman Mitchell. That's a new hand for him. Councilman Mitchell.
Sorry about that, Councilman Byrd.
You're okay, brother.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we as a council believe that the unrest is finished because we're going to take a vote, I think we're fooling ourselves, and I don't think any of the other 8 of you feel that way. And if anything, if what you've seen is anything like what I've seen, there is an unrest and lack of comfort level from a whole different opinion that I've received this week as far as keep funding, fund stronger. And so this act of the budget is more here because we're out of money July 1st. We don't have money to spend starting July 1st. But as far as the conversation that's going to have to take place even after July 1st, and the actions we're going to have to show as a council after July 1st will speak for themselves. And so I think that I'm actually personally in a very good place from a comfort level standpoint to get unrest from 2 different directions. And I think it'll help me personally focus on doing the things that this city should have been doing for many, many uncountable years. And I will continue to ask for leadership from my African-American brothers and sisters on the council. And I will yield at that, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Councilman Mitchell. Ms. Daisy, before, let me get Councilman Byrd in here and then I'll come to you, okay? I know I brought you in. Councilman Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is kind of going to segue to Ms. Daisy. It's hard when the policymakers and the policy checkers are the judge, the executioner, and the jury. That's the hardest part right there. And I think the thing that me and Russell dealt with 911 is that it was a group of people, a body in 911 that was the judge, the jury, and the executioner when it came to some things that was done wrong. And at that time, the humility or the understanding of what we was trying to say wasn't received, and the energy was messed up. And I learned this from Darren Leffert, Councilman Darren Leffert. We only have 2 stands when it comes to this council stuff. That's the budget and it's zoning. And after a lot of times people tell you what you want to hear. They'll tell you, yeah, we're with you and we understand and we're going to do this. But then after we pass this budget, really, we kind of get babysitted a lot of times throughout. You know, you'll hear some things or some people stand with you, but I just think your voice is not as strong as it is right now, or your authority to make true change and to hold people accountable is not as strong, because after we sign and give that money away, I mean, really, what grounds do we have to the next budget? And then, like Councilwoman Coonrod said, some of us might not even be here next year. So a lot of these employees and people have been working with the city for years, longer than we've been council people. So they've seen council people come and go. So, I mean, I just feel that at the end of the day, and this is the segue to it, if this budget is not passed or is deferred or pushed off or anything, Daisy, what is the ramifications that will happen? I heard Jerry Mitchell say that we run out of money July the 1st. It's a lot of Black and brown people that work for the city government that work in Chattanooga, you know, and these African Americans are my family members, some of them. What happens if this budget doesn't get passed by July the 1st? What happens to our employees?
Ms. Daisy, go ahead.
Oh, actually, first of all, I just want to say my hand went up before Mara came because I thought she was not going to be able to address
Okay.
the initial question. And after she was able to respond to your satisfaction, I really needed to take my hand down. I may not have taken it down in time.
Too late
Well,
now.
That was
well,
good.
you're
Yes.
here. You're here now. So
Too late now.
Okay, so
Go ahead
what happens? What happens if a budget doesn't pass?
Yes, ma'am. By July the 1st, what happens if this budget, like the world is in a different place, our city's in a different place. We're at the forefront of, hey, these changes, I get it, defunding the police, divesting, investing, I'm hearing all these different sayings. I think Chattanooga is not the city or not the place of Minnesota or these other places. But just so that the people that's listening on this Zoom meeting, what happens, because it's a lot of Black and brown people. I think it's more Black and brown people that work for the city than anywhere. I would love to know the numbers. What happens if we do not pass this budget? What happens to city employees? What happened to people during the COVID where people are struggling already? What happens if this budget's not passed by July the 1st?
Well, if a budget's not passed by July 1, legally, by state law, we shut down. If a budget is not passed by July 1, we are not authorized to spend dollars. Now, I don't know if that's your question, but that is the straightforward answer. You can't operate as an entity legally without a budget.
So after July the 1st, if our employees that will receive a check on July the 15th will not receive a check?
If we do not pass a budget of some sort. Now, there are other, there are options in that regard, but this council would have to pass a budget in order for us to continue to spend money past July 1.
All right, thank you.
okay. Councilwoman Burrs.
I, with all due respect, I think that wasn't a total answer. And I think you deserve that, Councilman. Daisy's absolutely correct in what she's saying. However, in past years, the budget hasn't been passed by the 30th or the 1st, and you do a continuing resolution. I think we should pass this budget because it's correct, but not out of fear. The city's bigger than that, and you can always do a continuing resolution. I don't know that that's what I would favor, but that is the truth.
Thank you.
May I?
Yeah,
respond?
Ms. Daisy, go ahead.
Councilwoman Burrs is it is totally correct, and that's why I said there are other options. However, since that option is on the table, I feel compelled to tell you that what that option would mean is that we would continue to operate as we are without regard for the fact that we are experiencing a severe loss in revenues. So that would say that from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint and from a fiscal standpoint and just from the right thing to do standpoint, we will continue to spend money at the same rate that we're spending money when we already know that those monies are not coming in. So that would be an irresponsible use of way to manage, if you will. So that is why I, of course, would not recommend a continuing budget.
Okay. Councilwoman Coonrod, I see your hand. Let me just remind the council, we do have 2 committee meetings today. One, the HR committee is on the disparity report, and the other is on Lincoln Park. So we can continue to spend our time here or save time for those committees. Councilwoman
Councilman,
Coonrod,
I had,
Councilwoman Burrs?
yeah, I think I've totally disappeared from the screen, but I've had my hand up.
I can see you.
Is that your way of
Yeah.
telling me? Uh, Daisy's correct. And what I've told people is that obviously you can have a continuing resolution. It's something you can do, but you not only are you continuing to spend at the level, you're not allowing for the changes, the good stuff that would come with the new budget. So what you need to be doing is weighing these to go forward as we are, has in a holding pattern, also addresses not only what Daisy said, and that's spending at a level we shouldn't be, but it also obviates our ability to make the changes to meet some of the needs. So, you know, I think the alternate version is a good version, but I don't want people voting on it in fear or not the full picture. I hope that answers your question, Councilman Byrd.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
Councilwoman Coonrod, you got a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. I'll make it quick, Chip.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilwoman Burrs, for saying that, because that's exactly what I was gonna say to my colleagues here. We have no reason to be in fear. If all we're gonna get as elected officials is if we don't vote on something, they're gonna have somebody to run against us. Well, that's the beauty of democracy. Whoever wanna run, they can. Guess what? We all gonna run together and go knock on doors together in District 9. That's how we gonna do it. And it's up to the constituents to vote for you. Well, even if the threats of, well, we gonna burn the city down, what is that gonna do? The buildings they gonna burn down, they got insurance on them. They gonna be replaced. They gonna be replaced. If they wanna cause harm to themselves, that's on them. Then yeah, you violating the law at that point. That means you go to jail. And that's on them. If they want to do that, I'm not going to uphold foolishness and nonsense and condone and breaking the law. Period.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Gilbert, is that a new hand?
Yeah, I want to follow what Councilwoman Coonrod said. You know, people talking about burning down, burning this, but at the end of the day, the same individual asked us, why can't we have a store in the west side? Why can't we have a store somewhere else? But it's hard to encourage somebody to spend millions of dollars in an area that you're setting on fire or saying you're going to do it. So we need to refrain from saying things like that. If you want things, economic development in your community, then let's work together, get it in the community. Not saying, well, we're going to do X things that's negative that will keep them out.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Ms. Lydia, go ahead and leave Ms. Mara and Ms. Daisy in for this, and let's go ahead and read B, please.
Okay. An ordinance appropriating, authorizing, or allocating funds to the capital improvements budget for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021.
Okay, Council, any questions on the, and we do have an alternate version for this as well. Any questions about the original version or the alternate version for any of these two ladies? Okay, I see no hands at this time.
Councilman, again, that's my job to move these, and there hasn't been any further discussion about it, and there was no discussion online either. So I need some sort of consensus.
Okay, I think, Ms. Sullivan, if I'm correct, if we move the alternate operating budget, by necessity, we would have to move the alternate operating budget. Is that not correct?
That is correct. Thank you, sir.
Councilwoman Burrs, I think that if we move the alternate operating budget, necessitates the alternate capital budget. Okay?
I just wanted that on record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, Miss Lydia, you can excuse Miss Mara and Miss Daisy, and we'll continue. Madam Clerk, let's read C, please.
Sorry, I'm also Madam Clerk, so I can.
Yeah, I'm a little confused today about that. So,
Well, I'm having,
So-
it'll take me a minute to take them out
I
or,
got it. I got it.
thank you.
thank
I
you, Vice
can't do
Chair.
both at once.
Okay.
Yes, you can, but I got it.
Okay.
All right.
An ordinance to amend Chattanooga City Code Part 2, Chapter 38 zoning ordinance so as to amend conditions number 2, 3, and 5 of ordinance number 13187 for property located at 4905 Central Avenue, more particularly described herein.
Yeah.
Councilman Oglesby?
Yeah, we can move forward with that, and we'll hear the presentation and go through the process tonight. So
Okay.
we can move on, Mr. Chair.
All
Thank you.
Very well. All right, Madam Clerk, 7A, please.
A resolution authorizing the Director of Wireless Communications to enter into a memorandum of understanding for partnership with Monroe County, Tennessee, for participation in and use of the Tennessee Valley Regional Communications System, and wherein Monroe County agrees to pay the master site access fee to be paid over a 10-year period, and to pay the radio access fees to be accessed on a yearly basis for all radio in use in Monroe County in the amount of $600,000.
Any questions concerning this item? I see no hands. 7B, please.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works Division for Waste Resources to pay a city claim for property damage which occurred on January 6th, 2020 at or near 5336 Austin Road, Chattanooga, Tennessee 37343 to Gabe Holden in the amount of $26,281.
All right. Councilman Mitchell, I think we covered this last week in Public Works, did we not?
Yes, sir, we did.
All right. Any new questions from the council? If not, all right. And I noticed, Madam Clerk, that we did not have next week's agenda on this agenda, which we normally go over. So I'm just going to ask, is there any questions from the council about next week's agenda, if you want to take a look at that in your council folder? Okay, I see no hands. What about purchases? And you may be aware that we're dealing with last week's purchases as well. So we have 2 weeks worth of purchases to look at tonight. Any questions concerning purchasing tonight? Okay. And the 3-week look ahead are items for future consideration. Any concerns or comments about any of those items? Okay. So one item before we go to Human Resource Committee that I would like to address tonight is at our public comment section of tonight's agenda. Some of you have asked the question, how we're going to handle that. Vice Chair Smith, what does it look, I mean, how many participants, attendees are signed up to speak tonight?
Give me just a minute, Mr. Chair. I need to refresh that information. I'll give you a number here in just a second.
Okay. I apologize. I thought you had that at your fingertips.
Not refreshed. We're at 176.
Okay. And I did have some questions from council members about how we were going to handle tonight's public comment. I felt like we need to discuss it publicly and address how we chose to handle the pretty heavy requests that have been made to speak. So if you have thoughts or comments, Councilwoman Coonrod, you are muted.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I'm not able to be on another 7-hour council meeting. I mean, I get it. Everybody's voice want to be heard. I think that's wonderful that we were willing to allow their voices to be heard. If so, for me, I'm not going to be on that long, and because I got a granddaughter that's going through some things, and I'm not going to miss another opportunity to sit at the dinner table with her or read her bedtime story or tuck her in the bed. She come first. Now, if any of my constituents that still have any issues about it and want to share, yes, they can reach me through my email. They can call me. We can set up a Zoom meeting, and that's how I prefer that they reach me.
Okay. Councilman Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. I also don't think it's fair. My constituents and people that I serve, I think if they want to talk to me, they will call me, they will email me. I've been answering emails of people that want to fund and defund. I've been talking to people over the phone. So I want to talk to people and I want to hear their voices. But what I don't appreciate is when I see graphics being put up that simulates Pornhub and say that the city council got gangbanged the other night by the community. I think that was very disrespectful when this body did everything they could to respect the pure fabric of democracy by listening to everyone. I think it's really disrespectful when you see a charge of people saying, send people to go signed up, let's give it to them again. You're not giving us nothing but disrespect when all we're trying to do is respect you. And I just think it's very disrespectful that people are charging themselves to just disrespect us and not hold the fabric of what we're trying to do is listen to people and make sure that we got people's responses and requests and we're taking it to heart and we're trying to do the right things. You can see just the conversations from the budget that we're doing right now. So any of my constituents that want to talk to me or need to reach out to me and express themselves, please email me, please call me, and I will adhere to your concerns that way. Thank you.
Councilwoman Burrs.
Mr. Chair, I think we gave a very full hearing last week. And as a result of that, I've heard from a lot of my constituents. I've met with a number of them at the office. I've met with the concerned citizens. I really like sitting and talking with them. I'll stay here as long as the council votes on tonight our being here. But I have to agree with my colleagues, Mr. Byrd, Ms. Coonrod, that I would like meaningful discourse, not just taking up a bunch of time discourse. And my colleagues know, because we've already done it, that I am there to talk with them, email with them, and by the way, they've done a wonderful job. Thank you.
Councilman Gilbert.
I agree with my colleagues. When Councilman Byrd said about that inappropriate thing on Facebook, it's saying that you're not trying to sit down and discuss your concerns. You're trying to make a point where it's a negativity point. It's ironic that we as council try our best to give a voice to our constituents. We are constantly trying to change rules for them to actually speak and do things with the city. It's ironic that the more we do is not enough. But the other government side, the only thing they get is, I'm gonna turn my back on it. Or that when they say we are through talking, they're through talking. I did not see not one thing, no complaint whatsoever against them saying it was less than an hour, we shutting them down. But we went to almost one something in the morning with our constituents. So to me, regardless of what we do, it's still not gonna be enough. And I believe that we have done a lot more than any other municipality that we have out there. And again, I haven't heard them when they talk about the police. Well, the sheriff department have done all this. Who shot the tear gas? It wasn't us, it was the sheriff department. Who done the negativity with the guy paying for it? It was the sheriff department. But I don't see nobody complaining about that. They come to us about the sheriff department. We have no jurisdiction over the sheriff department. But I don't see them marching on that end. I don't see them marching at talking about what they're not doing. So I agree with my colleagues.
Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo those sentiments exactly. We did a very good job at listening. This council stayed with every single speaker last week. I was appalled at some of the social media circus that I saw. I had people monitoring it from many different angles. So thank you, council, for standing up, sticking up, because these issues that we have to solve, we need to get to solving them. And for people to use us as some sort of propaganda tool, I'm not in favor of tonight.
Councilman Oglesby.
Thank you, very much, Mr. Chair. I agree with my colleagues wholeheartedly. Last week, it was appalling, and it was really uncalled and unjustified. Just like everybody else, I've received a number of phone calls, emails, and texts from citizens specifically in my district voicing both sides of the coins, and they can continue to do so. As a matter of fact, even tomorrow and Thursday, I have some meetings set up to talk to some citizens like that. But to circle back to my colleague, Councilwoman Coonrod, 7.5 hours is too much. And I would like to propose, because we have committed to have that brief period of time at the end of our meeting for constituents to speak, but I would like to limit that tonight, and you as chair can make that happen. So I would like to limit that to possibly, as I mentioned last week, to an hour. It's not like the first time we've had listening sessions where we had a time limit on how we handled it.
Let me bring our attorney in. Mr. Attorney, we do have council rules established that basically describe how, at what point someone can speak and for how long they can speak. Would we not have to have a motion from the floor and a vote of the majority of the council to change those rules for tonight's meeting?
Yes, sir. Y'all adopted your current rules here of procedure on November the 5th of 2019 last year. They specifically make provisions for the time of public comment in section 7 of that document on here, which you've adopted. But you also have the provision under, I guess, section 7 of your rules to say that the rules may be amended at any time by a majority vote of the council. If you choose to establish any requirements that are different concerning this meeting, you just have to have a vote and a majority vote during the meeting to make that determination.
And that would be at 6 o'clock. You're saying we would have a motion, and to change the rules for engagement, we would need to do that tonight at 6 o'clock. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And I would recommend that you do that at the beginning of the meeting so that people would have as much notice as possible before the end of the meeting. Yes.
Okay, council, then what I will do, I will open the floor at the beginning of the meeting. And if you so desire, someone can make a motion to address how we handle public comment at the end of our agenda session tonight. The only thing that I would ask, and Vice Chair Smith, I know when people register that they fill in a topic line. I would ask that anyone that is not speaking on the budget, on a different matter from the budget, that they would be moved to the top. And what I would do is take them in the order in which they signed up tonight. Is that possible to do, sir?
I'm happy to go through this, Mr. Chair. I was going to comment as soon as my colleagues were done in a couple of parts. Number one, in looking through the list and the notes, I see a substantial number of names that are exactly the same as last week. The majority of comments in here for the topics are exactly the same as last week. I've only seen one that is not about the budget or divesting from the police department so far, and just scanning through the 170 some or however many we're at now. So I'm happy to go through and see if there's any that are not related, as best I can tell, because it is just whatever somebody types in. So I am able to do that, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
But I don't know that I'm going to come up with any, but I'm happy to look through at your request. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the other thing that we might do, if there's a way to sparse out the ones that did speak last week and give an opportunity for anyone that has not spoken, at least move them up in priority as well. Councilman Mitchell, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question.
Yes.
I understand what we're going to do now. We have had rules in the past that you can't speak on agenda items. You can only speak twice in a 30-day period, some different rules, things like that. I believe we waived that you can't speak on agenda items at one point in our rules.
That's correct.
And I would question if, as far as versus putting a time limit on something, should a rule like that be re-implemented when people start making motions and things like that? Versus let's go for an hour, let's go for 2 hours, let's go for 7 hours. I mean, I'm just asking the question of the council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Is there any way, Ken or Chairman, that we could filter out like people who actually live in the city of Chattanooga? Because I went through my list last week of the people who gave me their name and said they live in my district, and they didn't even live in Chattanooga. And a lot of them. And I would rather hear from people who actually live in our city versus somebody who live on the outskirts in Georgia or in East Ridge or those areas. But I think citizens of Chattanooga need to be heard.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chair.
Yeah, Councilwoman Coonrod, I can go based on the address that has been provided as to whether it says Chattanooga. It would take a lot more work to actually fill it all in to ensure that they are within the city limits, or at least the address that was provided is within the city limits. There were a few that were pretty obvious. There was at least one that I saw that was Lookout Mountain or, in East Ridge. I mean, those are pretty obvious. But otherwise, I just have to go by the address that was given, and it says Chattanooga. So, and then as far as the district, it's whatever they type in, unless, again, you use that address and run it through and check them all, which there's no way I would have time to do, considering we take submissions right up to 6 o'clock.
And then my only other thing is, are we able to see the video of the people that's talking crazy to us, calling us out our names, saying they're going to kick our butts and all that stuff? Because I need to see a physical face. So if I'm in public and somebody running up on me, I got a face with what was said. I just think it's unfair for us to be seen and people talking to us like we're dogs. I want to see the looks on their face. So when they're saying they work for Keller Williams or they work for they this place and that place, I want to see how you look when you're saying that stuff.
Amen.
But Vice Chair, is that we've got a request to show video?
Totally up to the council. I'm happy to do whatever the council would like to do with that.
I
believe I can lock down the system as far as the security issues that we were concerned about earlier, and issues that Zoom has had in the past. I feel confident we'd be able to do that.
Okay. Let's address all of those issues at 6 o'clock then. Is that fair? Okay. If that addresses tonight under public comment, is there any other business that needs to come before the council under agenda items at this time? If not, Councilman Gilbert, I'm going to turn the chair over to you for Human Resource Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Can I get a motion of the last meeting?
So
moved.
Second.
Can I get a vote on the motion?
Hold up, bro.
Well, the lady, wait a minute, I can't see her.
Yeah, Councilman Gilbert, if there's we could just do, if there's no objection.
No objection in the minutes.
Stand as read or stand
Thank
as
you, sir.
recorded.
Can I put Mr. Tony Summers up, please?
Yes, sir.
And before he comes up, can we allow the Mr. Strong organization to go through the whole presentation, and then we can ask questions after the presentation? They got quiet.
Good.
Yes, that's fine.
Let me look at it. Is that all right with everybody else?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Tony,
It's office time.
Good afternoon, members of council.
how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Hope you are as well.
Doing well.
This afternoon, we have our partners from Griffin and Strong to join us to present to each of you the final report on the disparity study as it relates to our procurement in Chattanooga, for the city of Chattanooga. And with us, we'll have Mr. Rodney Strong and Ms. Michelle Clark Jenkins. And in the interest of time, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to them to do their presentation and have time for questions that council may have. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Rodney. Rodney, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Salmons. And thank you, members of council, for taking a few minutes to hear our report on the recently completed Chattanooga disparity study. I'm just going to go through the first few slides. And do I have control of the slides, Mr. Salmons?
I have control of them, Rodney.
Okay. All right. And so we're going to just move forward and go through the first few slides for you. For those of you who aren't aware, we're a firm, we're both a law firm and a public policy consulting firm. And we focus on disparity research, contract compliance. We've got an extremely talented team. If you can go to the next slide. And, you know, I've been involved in this area for a long time, and our principal investigator was Dr. Vince Egan. He's done over 120 disparity studies in different jurisdictions, and he's successfully defended 6 programs in federal court. We can go to the next slide. And so this is just a list of the people that we had working on the project. And we had 2 subcontractors, Daraka Satcher with the Satcher Group and Lloyd Robinson with LAW reporting, law reporting. Go to the next slide. And so I want to spend just a minute and just talk about what a disparity study is, because we find it really helps a lot to understand that a disparity study is really an opportunity to analyze the spending. If you could go back, Michelle, you left the slide I was on. A disparity study is really excuse me. A disparity study is really an opportunity to analyze the spending of a governmental entity. And the City of Richmond versus J.A. Croson Company case, which came out in 1989, said basically that if you're going to have any type of affirmative action that takes race or gender into consideration, you have to have a factual predicate. That means you have to have an analysis of whether there's a disparity between the availability and the utilization of firms. You go out to the next slide, Michelle. So these are the basics. Is there a statistically significant disparity in the relevant geographic and product market between a percentage of qualified minority and women-owned firms willing and able to provide goods and services to the city in each category? If a statistically significant disparity study exists, have factors other than race and gender been ruled out as the cause of that disparity? Can discrimination be adequately remedied with race neutral and gender neutral remedies? If race and gender neutral remedies are not sufficient, does the evidence from the study legally support a race and or gender conscious program? And are the proposed remedies narrowly tailored to the strong basis and evidence for the study? So these were our study objectives. And Michelle, you can go to the next page. And this is just a chart that describes our study approach. We did a legal analysis, policy and procurement process review. We collected the data. We did a relevant market analysis, which Michelle will talk about a little bit more as she talks about the findings. We did a utilization analysis, an availability analysis, a disparity analysis, a private sector analysis. We also collected anecdotal evidence, and we produced a final report recommendation. Michelle. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, and Michelle Clark Jenkins is our director of our consulting division, and she was the project manager for this project. And she's going to talk to you about the statistical findings that we had for the city of Chattanooga. Michelle.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us to present this study. And these are our statistical findings. The first thing we do is we have to determine, what are we studying? What's the geographic marketplace that we're studying? Who are the firms that we are studying? So that's really indicated by your own data. So we look at where you are spending at least 75% of your dollars in each of the 5 procurement categories. And that is what determines the relevant market for that area. So in construction, you were spending, and what we do is we kind of radiate out. We start with the city of Chattanooga. We then said, well, have you spent 75% of your dollars? No, pull out to Hamilton County. If not, then we go out to surrounding counties. Then we go to the whole state of Tennessee. And then we look at surrounding states, starting with the place where you're spending the most amount of your dollars until we get to that place where you're spending 75%, at least 75% of your dollars. So you'll notice that in construction, that was Tennessee and the state of Kentucky. For architecture and engineering, as well as professional services, it was Hamilton County. And then for other services, it was the states of Tennessee and Georgia. And for goods, which is not unusual, it was the whole United States. So then we looked at what firms are ready, willing, and able. Who are the available firms to perform services for the city of Chattanooga? And we did that by, in essence, gathering governmental lists. So firms that were certified, firms that were registered to do business with you, firms that were registered. You have a very small certified DBE list, but we included that. We included, if we had lists from other jurisdictions with firms that were in your relevant market, we included them. So this is how it broke out by each ethnicity group. So we have a total in construction of a 13.45% minorities, and then 19.3% Caucasian females, with a total MWBE availability of 32.58%. And if you go across, you'll see the in A&E, so remember, these are within the relevant market. And remember, A&E was within Hamilton County. So we're looking at 3.33%. Professional services, this is total minority, 5.34%. Other services, 11.08%, and goods, 4.67%. When you look at Caucasian females, we've got 12.22% in A&E, 5.21% in professional services, 9.27% in other services, and 7.62% in goods. So the next thing we did was we looked at the level of contracting that the city is doing. So what we want to see is, are all of your contracts big contracts? Are they all little contracts? And how did the dollars split in that threshold? So, and the number of awards. So this is a table that shows you all contracting put together. I will show you the next table, which is construction only. So in this one, if you look at the bottom, 33 of your awards were over $5 million, but they accounted for 57.18% of all of your dollars. You have a lot of really small contracts out there. We did not look at anything under $1,000 because it'll tend to skew the results, because you'll have a penny or 2 cents here or 5 cents there, which will, which are not real awards. There'll be sometimes placeholders. So we looked at 1,000 as the minimum. So 1,000 to 5,000, we actually had 6,000 of those, but they only counted for 1.27% of your dollars. So this is all contracting, and this is over a period of your fiscal year 14 through 18. So it was a 5-year study period. Your average award was $109,000. Your median award was only $3,600. So then when we look at construction, you had 9 construction awards that were over $5 million, but those 9 construction awards accounted for over 80% of your spend. Again, a lot of little contracts, so a lot of, not a lot of big contracts, but they're concentrated in terms of the dollars. And then you have a lot of small contracts with very small dollars. And your average contract in construction was about $1 million, but your median contract was $6,700. So then we looked at prime utilization and did kind of the same thing we did with availability. We split it out by ethnic group. And again, this is a 5-year spend. These are only firms within the relevant market. And so, you know, if a firm is outside the relevant market and that's where you spent your dollars, they are not included in a disparity study. So we have a total here of, in construction, of $230 million. And out of that, you had a very small percentage. It was less than 1% of your prime construction dollars went to MWBEs. Professional services, again, less than 1% of those dollars went to MWBEs. In other services, about 9% went to MWBEs, and in A&E, 6.64%, and in goods, a little more than 3%. So out of a total spend of in construction, you had $230 million. Only 522,000 of that went to MWBEs. A little more, about 2 million in professional services, 16, almost 17 million in other services, and 1.3 million in A&E, and 7.2% in goods. So now we looked at the disparities, which the disparity is simply the comparison between the availability of firms and your spend. So it's a comparison of percentages. So what percentage of African-American firms did you have that were on our list who could perform services in construction compared to how the percentage of dollars that you spent with African-American firms in construction, for example. And then we determine what's called a disparity index to determine whether they are statistically significantly underutilized or overutilized. So if you'll notice in construction, every MWBE group is statistically significantly underutilized as primes. In A&E, and actually it pretty much is in every area, in every category, except in other services, Hispanic American-owned firms were in fact overutilized. And the places where you see the asterisks means that they were underutilized, but it wasn't statistically significantly so. So then we looked at subcontractor utilization. The problem with subcontractor utilization is that the city does not track subcontractor data, which of course is one of our recommendations, is that you in fact do start to track that, because that's a good way for small businesses as well as minority and women-owned businesses to come into the process, is to be subcontractors. And then if you're not tracking them, then you won't see, you know, where those dollars are going, ultimately going. So what we do instead is we do a prime vendor questionnaire. So except for goods, where there is little or no subcontracting, we sent surveys to every prime who you had done business with over the 5-year period. Of course, not all of them respond, but as long as there's no response bias, we take the organic responses from the firms that do respond, and we calculate a subcontractor utilization analysis. So again, we've got about almost 3% of all subcontractors were in fact MWDBEs. Hold on, let me go back. And that was in construction. In professional services, we had a participation in professional services of about 43% of MWBEs being subcontractors. And again, this is based on a questionnaire. And that's kind of typical that we will get back information only really with professional services and A&E and construction, because there's very little subcontracting in the other areas. In A&E, we had about 43, almost 44%. So then we looked at, again, did a Disparity Index, which compares the utilization of each minority group or MWBE group to their own availability in the relevant market. And in construction, we kind of have straight down the line statistically significant underutilization in construction. In A&E, we had some underutilization, but it was not statistically significant. And in go back to that. And in professional services, we did have statistically significant underutilization in all minority groups. So out of this, we the overall statistical finding and of the study was that we do have a basis to introduce race and gender conscious remedies or policies. The reason we came to that is because the city, in fact, has tried some race neutral measures to increase the utilization of MWBE firms, but really the study itself demonstrates that those measures have not been effective in ameliorating the identified disparities. We also did a private sector analysis, and a private sector analysis says, what does this look like in terms of the private marketplace? In other words, the spend in the Chattanooga marketplace, what does that look like excluding your spend? So just looking at what's happening out in the marketplace. And in fact, we determined that the race and gender status of a firm owners, in fact, does have an impact, an adverse impact on their ability to secure contracting opportunities with the city as well as in the environment. So these were the other things that we determined from the private sector analysis. And the first thing is that you cannot explain the disparities by a difference in capacity. So in other words, you can't say, well, the reason that MWBEs are not getting as many awards is because they don't have the capacity for the work. We also found that it wasn't because they weren't bidding. So we found that the disparities could not be explained by differentials in MWBE prime bidding submissions. We also found that disparity analysis results are also consistent with disparities in winning prime contracts with the city of Chattanooga and are being driven by discrimination against MWBEs. We also found that relative to non-MWBEs, that MWBEs do face barriers independent of their capacity or their ability in securing public contracts with the city of Chattanooga. So then we went on to do an anecdotal analysis, and anecdotal is, we do it from a lot of different vantage points. We did a survey. We also did interviews with firms. And we did public hearings. We actually even added a public hearing. So we, instead of doing just the ones we had determined to do, we added another public hearing so more people could be heard. Out of that anecdotal, and what the anecdotal helps us to do is once we found there's a disparity or not, then we want to explain why it exists and perhaps what to do about it. And sometimes the best way to do that is to go out into the business community and ask them what the pros and cons are about doing business with the city of Chattanooga. So if you kind of put all of these comments together, what you're really getting is a sense of being marginalized, not being heard, not being given an opportunity, that there's a good old boy network, that there's, and a lot of that ultimately comes down to needing to do a lot more outreach, a lot more incentives, a lot more pulling in that MWBE community. One of the things that we also heard is that there was a lack of engagement with the MWBE community and a lack of an engagement strategy. So the conclusion of our findings, again, was that the race-neutral approaches were not really sufficient to promote equity in public contracting, and that we're not suggesting that the city not include race and gender-neutral elements, but that they need to be bolstered with some race and gender conscious programs, and that the race and gender neutral programs you currently have can be more effectively administered. One of the things we wanted to commend the city for is that there clearly is a culture change and commitment in Mayor Burke's administration. We heard that as we were out in the community. There seemed to be this, you know, the administration means well. So, and also the setup of that minority affairs staff and the agency that you have, you know, that's a good start to at least have something that where firms can come. So then these are our recommendations. And we put in this 5 essential components for an effective procurement inclusion program is because one of the things we want to admonish you of is that as we go through these recommendations, we want to make sure that the city is prepared for them. We know that given COVID and a lot of other things that have happened in the last few months, that cities are taking a real financial hit, and establishing huge departments sometimes is a very difficult thing. So as you consider our recommendations, we also say consider the resources and the personnel that you intend to allocate to these, because doing a big, robust race and gender conscious program and having one person to administer it would probably not do justice to that undertaking. But there are things you can do to kind of lead up to that. We've had some conversations already about, you know, how do you move forward in this kind of environment? And we will continue to have those conversations with the city. So Rodney, do you want to pick up here?
Sure. We're making a few recommendations. We believe that there should be formal MWBE legislation, and we've already shared examples from a few other cities with staff. We believe that there needs to be adequate staffing and resources to effectively administer a program using the principles that we talked about on the previous slide. We believe that any staff that comes on board has to be trained properly, and we have to we're certainly recommending that there be a contracting forecasting process. And that would be a situation in which you identify opportunities as they're coming online, and you make sure that you have reached out to MWBE firms so that they're ready for those opportunities as they come up. And we're also recommending contract debundling. So those are the basic recommendations. And I think you have another slide, Michelle. So we're also recommending coordinated vendor outreach. We don't believe that you necessarily need to expend a lot of money on certification. We think that you can work out a reciprocal certification arrangement. Also, we think a lot of the supportive services can be shared through SBA and SBIC's small business resource centers and those kinds of things. And we also believe that there ought to be a prompt payment policy for the city of Chattanooga. And then we believe that there ought to be negotiated economic development goals and community benefit agreements in any new economic development opportunities in the city. We believe that the data infrastructure has to be improved. We believe that there ought to be MWBE goals in construction. And we believe that there ought to be a robust system for tracking subcontractor payments, not just to MWBEs, but to all subcontractors. And so that would require change in the way you track your data. Michelle? Michelle, you're on mute.
So we will take any questions that you have.
I don't see any hands yet. Okay, I'll see Chairmanship Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, going through the list of barriers, and one of them, I think, that we've heard before is the amount of time that it takes to get paid once you get completed with the job. I guess at this point, that's something that we need to hear from administration. How do we achieve prompt payment? I guess the other thing is, I think there are some policy changes that we can make and some legislative changes that we can make. I guess what I would question is any changes that would lead to having to fund an office of whatever, knowing that we're coming to the end of our administrative term and legislative term, and considering that, obviously, if we just passed, or well, say just passed, we're just considering a budget for this coming year, which I'm assuming that any funding would have to come in the 2022 budget year that will only be presented to this council, but not passed by this council. So thoughts or comments about that, Mr. Strong?
Well, from a policy standpoint, you'll have to make a determination as to whether or not you want to pass on something that would require funding under another council. But we believe that there are a number of steps that ought to be taken to reform the way you do business in the procurement arena generally. And so the steps that I was outlining, as long as I think you ought to take as many steps as you feel comfortable taking given the budgetary concerns and, of course, the concern that you have about passing on an unfunded mandate to a new council.
And you do already have this Office of Minority Affairs, which has already been set up. But what it's really been doing primarily is really been doing work in more cultural related things. And so, yes, part of what we're suggesting is perhaps using that full-time equivalent. I'm assuming it's a full-time equivalent and any other bodies that you can put in there who can help to begin to administer some of these potential programs. Because we will recommend that a study being done this year and no implementation of it for relatively 2 years will likely make this study ineffective.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One follow-up to Mr. Salmons, if I could. Tony, and we've discussed this before about the length of time that it takes to get paid once you submit a pay request. I mean, that's something that we sort of grappled with in the past. What's the answer? I mean, why haven't we already done something if we know that's a problem and a barrier to minority groups?
Well, we've been already working with that. We've been working on that ever since we've, not only when we had this discussion earlier, but that has been our goal in trying to remove some of those barriers and look at what our processes were currently at that time and make the necessary changes to speed up that process. We've been looking at.
Okay, what have we done then?
Well, we've been working with our office, our OpMod team, and looking at our data and looking at how long it takes us to try to get certain things paid. And then we've gone in and tried to look at things that based on the thresholds that we have, if those things are presenting barriers before us, to look at that and see how we can to make those changes. We had our whole team in our procurement department go through a peak training, looking at all of our existing processes, trying to identify where time can be saved, how we can reduce the time to pay, and working along with our accounting department as well. So we have done some streamlining. Our team actively got engaged in that. It may seem as though there may be small bits of things that we're doing now, but it has reduced some of our timing in that. We're trying to get more engaged with our vendors and trying to do more outward engagement with them. Before COVID, as you know, we had one purchasing fair that we went out into the community. Our goal was to do more outreach to our businesses instead of them coming to a venue that made it more challenging for them. We wanted to remove those challenges by addressing it by taking the fair for that engagement to them. So we had the first one in Councilman Gilbert's district. We had proposed to have the next one in the Hickson area, and our goal was to have at least a minimum of 2 of those types of engagements, allowing the businesses to come to a venue that made it easier for them to attend, as well as be able to have a group of individuals from each of the departments that secure goods and services, as well as have other partners in the community that provide services for educating a lot of our businesses, and actually have our buyers there who would engage with the potential partners and trying to get their information, where we can then set them up to go through some educational sessions and how to do business better with the city. So we've been trying to look at changing our existing processes that will reduce the time to pay, as well as trying to do more engagement. So we're already actively trying to engage in some of those practices.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman,
What I also might say is with prompt pay, the issue was heavily with primes to subs, for which having a prompt pay ordinance in place that pretty much says, and we see this all over, where a lot of those ordinances are that a prime has to pay their sub within 7 days. So having a requirement by the primes to pay their subs is probably critical in terms of the comments we were hearing.
Thank you. I have Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Great presentation. And we all know what it was going to reveal. I'm sure it ain't no secret. And I'm like the rest of us, like, what's next? What are we going to do to really change it? And that comes with, implementing the policy. And then also, talking to our mayor about the percentages of the percentage of business that they can do with minorities to increase that. And I think he can be aggressive in his percentage numbers at this point. But I also been watching the work that you all done with Nashville, and they created an equal business opportunity ordinance. I shared it with Russell as well. And with some of the ask, and I know that they're metro and we're not, but they're dealing with the same exact issues that we are. So Russell, I'd like to revisit that and see what we can add to it, or that's pertaining to the city of Chattanooga, and give it a little more teeth to it.
Okay. I don't see any other hands, but I have a question myself. Based on the resources that we currently have and the employees, do you see us, we have to move forward. Like you say, 2 years, it's no need of doing this at all because we just lose momentum. Based on what we have currently, can you set up something for the administration to look at to move forward with what we have for employees now?
Yeah, go ahead. Councilman Gilbert, we've been working really closely with your team. We have had some conversations with them. We've provided them with some ordinances from some other comparable jurisdictions, including Nashville and Greensboro, North Carolina. And we involved your team in a organization that we're working with called Living Cities, that's working to increase procurement inclusion around the country. And so we had a convening that they attended. We've got a lot of best practices. My experience in government, I spent, almost 8 years as Director of Contract Compliance for the City of Atlanta. And I had 12 years altogether in Atlanta city government. And my experience in government is that there are really several things. Sometimes you can look at certain positions that you already have, and if you restructure them to a certain degree, and then you retrain the staff to do things in a different way, you can get an impact. And one of the things I find is that oftentimes we pass legislation and we don't think through the next steps. And that's why one of those slides in our presentation was, okay, these are the steps that you ought to take in trying to make sure that people understand how to reposition it. Now, of course, with the budget cuts that are coming as a result of this current COVID-19 induced recession, there's going to be some difficulty there, but we're going to try to make sure we maximize every opportunity. And we're going to work, really closely with your team to make sure that happens. We've had some conversations with them since we had the convening with them last week. And I know that they've got some ideas that they're thinking through. So I'm confident that there will be some positive recommendations that your team will come forward with.
I don't see no hand. Are we going to share with council some of the recommendations from Mr. Strong's organization on what we can do right now so that we can be on the same page?
We're in the process of looking at that again since COVID, the direction that we were headed in impacted us. So we're in the process of redirecting and looking at those same opportunities. As Rodney indicated, the session that we were a part of last week was fantastic. It allowed us to touch base with a lot of other cities, not only in Tennessee, but throughout the country, that has a lot of best practices that we want to take a look at as well. So yes, we'll be sharing that with council as we develop it.
Do we have a time frame? Because I don't want to sit on the shelf. Do we have a time frame where if it's 6 months, we'll implement something, or we look at the low-hanging fruit starting out that we can put in place so that we can start looking at moving this forward?
We don't have a timeline that's identified at this time, but as we're looking at that low-hanging fruit, we will be implementing that as immediately, as quick as we possibly can. And as we do so, we'll be sharing that with council frequently.
Okay. I don't see any hands risen. Mr. Strong, do you want to say anything before we go to the next meeting?
I'd just like to say it's been a privilege to work for the city of Chattanooga. We really appreciated this engagement, and our commitment as a firm is to always maintain our relationships with the governments we've had an opportunity to work with, and we intend to continue our relationship with you and your team, and we're always available for any questions or concerns or any assistance that we can provide you.
Thank you, sir. And one more thing, Tony, I know you say you don't have a timeline, but here we are in June. Will we actually see something probably in September, October, that we have something started?
I would say yes. Again, we'll be looking at what we consider low-hanging fruit, and those are things that won't really cost us anything dollar-wise. So I would say what all that will look like, I wouldn't want to try to disclose it at this point, but I would say yes.
Okay. I don't see any more hands. Well, I definitely appreciate Mr. Strong and your team. This is a thing that should have been in place years ago, but I'm glad that we are beginning to start and make sure it actually happened. Again, I don't want nothing to sit on the shelf. I want it to be put in practice. And as we go into put into practice, and we add to it as we go along. And I believe Mr. Tony Simon will actually push it for us, because I believe he would think that we all believe we need opportunity for all. So if that's being said, if there's no other questions.
Councilman Gilbert?
Yes, sir.
I just, on behalf of the administration, want to thank Rodney and Michelle and their whole team. They have been very good to work with. Each and every time that we've looked to them for some additional information, they've always made themselves available. As I indicated, they made it available for us to participate in the Living Cities session last week, and we're looking forward to working with them going forward.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Well, if there's no other questions, we will go to the next meeting that's dealing with economic and development. Is that correct, Mr. Overby? You're on mute. You're muted.
I got you. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. We're getting ready to move into economic and community development.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Before I actually get started, Lydia, would you please bring up Donna Williams and Blight Bailey, please?
Yes, sir.
And at this time, I'll call the Economic and Community Development Committee to order. If there's no objections, we'll have approval of the minutes.
So move. Approve.
Okay. All right. Today's Economic and Community Development Committee meeting is going to focus on the Lincoln Park update, which I know Councilwoman Coonrod and Councilman Byrd has been championing over just forever. So Donna, if you're on, let's get started. She's muted. Donna, you're muted.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. Good afternoon, Council. As you well know, the money for the Lincoln Park redevelopment, the money that exists that's been funded, is in the Economic and Community Development Department. In FY18, in the FY18 budget, the $200,000 was allocated. We had every intention of moving forward with the design of the park through a public process. However, as the process began, the Lincoln Park Coalition reached out and had opposition to a CDOT project, Central Avenue. And once that occurred, the two projects were merged just by virtue of the way that the project on the federal side, as far as roads go, the two were merged. And so we are stalled on the design portion of it until the road portion is resolved. And Blythe Bailey will give you the details on that.
Okay, Blight, you got the floor.
Yes, sir, Mr. Councilman. I've got a short sort of summary on picking up from what Ms. Williams just said. In preparation for this, I retraced my steps and refreshed my memory on the timeline. There was funding that was passed as a part of the fiscal year 18 budget for $200,000, which was available for design and planning, as Ms. Williams indicated. That was the summer of 2017. So the fiscal year 18 budget was approved in the summer of 2017. Later that summer, in August of 2017, the keeper of the National Register, which is the federal organization that designates historic landmarks, issued a notification indicating that parts of the original Lincoln Park were considered eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. I have said to my team, as well as our consultant and TDOT on multiple occasions, even going back quite a ways, that I'm supportive of the decision that the keeper made. I'm personally, and our team is excited about the possibility to preserve the park, particularly the elements that were deemed eligible by the keeper of the National Register. The notification from the keeper dated August of 2017 indicated 3 stone pillars that are existing. I'm sure Councilman Byrd and members of the community are very familiar with those 3 stone pillars. One of them is at the intersection of Blackford and Central to the left as you enter what was the historic entrance of the park, and 2 others that are farther east from the park. It also identified the tennis courts and the baseball field as being original and being eligible for the historic register. It did indicate that the portion of the park that is on the eastern side is the part that is considered to be eligible for the register, and the part to the west is not. Now, and as Ms. Williams said, the preferred alignment for our Central Avenue project that we've been working on for quite some time, we've been in the Nepa phase, which is the environmental phase that includes all of the environmental resources inclusive of historic resources. That preferred alignment is expected to impact those historic elements. And so because that project is federally funded, we're required to follow strict federal processes for thorough analysis of those elements in the park and a determination of the effects of our project on the park. The coalition of community members applied to TDOT to become an official consulting party. Also around that time, they were granted that designation, and we have welcomed them as an official consulting party. We had a meeting in the fall of 2017 to talk about the process that we would go through. And part of that process, the first thing that we did was we selected an independent historian. Members of the consulting party were part of the selection committee for that consultant, and I believe we all mutually agreed on the one that we selected. That qualified historian completed an assessment of effects and working towards the Section 106 document, which is a federal requirement to show the historically eligible resources and how they may be affected by a federally funded project. And now at this particular moment, we are actually attempting to identify a date for what's called a resolution of adverse effects meeting, which basically means we're going to work with the consulting party to determine the best way to mitigate the impacts of our project on the historic resource of the park. We've targeted a handful of possible dates in early to late July. I am also very excited about that. We've been working very hard for a long period of time to get to this point. And again, as I said at the beginning, we have been committed to preserving the park. The elements that are now deemed eligible historically provide some focus on one of the ways that we might preserve that park. We have been unable to formally initiate the planning or design work because of the requirements of the federal process. But now that we get to the point where we have this meeting with the consulting party, we're excited to come together and figure out the commitments that we can make. And also that meeting that we will have, again, it's not yet scheduled, but that we're trying to schedule for July, the results of that meeting will be commitments that we are obligated to make through the federal funding process. So at that point moving forward, there are a number of other steps. We have to complete a 4F, which is another part of a requirement for the federal government when you're dealing with historic resources. And we also have to formalize the elements that we do as part of our project to comply with those historic resources. So we're all very excited to get to the point where we can do the preservation of the park. And that, I think the reason that I'm here now is there was some question about that funding. And so as Donna said, I added a little bit more detail to it. That is the reason that funding has not yet been spent, because the project is tied up in our street project, and we're hopeful that this summer we will get to a point where we can move forward.
Okay. Councilman Gilbert, I see your hand, sir.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions. How much money, at one time I thought that someone said it was $2 million set aside for Lincoln Park. Is that still there?
Councilman, I did some research because I also kept hearing the $2 million. Councilman Byrd had indicated there was $2 million. What I determined, and I will defer to anybody above me or more closely involved in the budget, but I think I've uncovered the reason that there's this $2 million. In the fiscal year 18 budget, the fiscal year 18 had $200,000, which you all know the budget that you pass on that date is for money that's allocated during that 12-month period. Each of the capital budgets that you pass also include a 5-year capital plan. In the fiscal 18 budget, there was $1.8 million set aside in a future fiscal year to be used for construction. And remember, at the time in summer of 2017, our project was approaching the completion of its Nepa phase. That was going to be the point at which we were able to separate the two projects after the Nepa project was finished. So I believe that the reason we targeted construction money in that fiscal year's 5-year plan was because we felt like it would be ready for construction. But soon after that budget was passed, the keeper made its designation about the historic eligibility of the park. And so we were not able to use that money in the following fiscal year. So it didn't carry forward to the next fiscal year. But that's where the $2 million comes from, 1.8 plus 200.
My understanding that when we have money allocated, we vote on that money to go to a specific area, that it stays with that area. So how did it get moved or what?
Well, again, this is not, I'll invite anybody that knows more about the budget to speak over me, but the way I understand the budget is the current fiscal year is the fiscal year for which you are approving allocations of monies. The 5-year plan is exactly that. It's a plan, and those dollars don't get fiscally obligated until the year upon which those monies are going to be used.
So you're saying that we never voted on $2 million for earmark for Lincoln Park?
You voted on $200,000 for the planning process, and then there was a $1.8 million allocation that was proposed but was never voted on, is my understanding.
That's right.
Never voted on?
Correct. Yes, sir.
And who currently owns the land?
Erlanger.
So wouldn't it be wise that we start making sure the city owns the land? Because same problem I'm having now up in my area, that about the land, who owns the land. I think that we need to secure that, first of all, from Erlanger if we're going to do it. And then I noticed that on the capital budget, we got the 3rd and 4th Street involved with that. So that's the same area on capital that we have, or we might approve this day or sometime this year?
Well, I can speak to the ownership of the property in Blythe. Mr. Bailey, you may want to speak to the 34th Street project. But as far as the ownership of the property, in the previous administration, under the Littlefield administration, there was an agreement made for a land swap for the property that's currently owned by Erlanger, the portion of Lincoln Park owned by Erlanger, in exchange for property that the city owns on Olds Avenue in South Chattanooga. That agreement has stayed in place. There was an agreement to do so. The Erlanger board at that time and the city of Chattanooga administration at that time. And Mayor Burke has constantly, without wavering, stayed in contact with Erlanger with the change of CEOs, change of boards to make sure that that agreement stays in place.
So what would it take for that agreement to go forward?
Well, any number of things, but what would be particularly helpful is for us to know that the project, that the community supports the project. And so, as I said before, the park itself is now intertwined with the road project. And that's for a variety of legal reasons and reasons associated with the road construction that Mr. Bailey is more familiar with than I am.
Well, this is not my area, it's Councilman Byrd's area, but I think that, again, I had the same issues with some property inside 5th District where we don't own the land, and if we don't own the land, we can't do anything with the land. So I think the first thing we need to do is secure the property. If we're gonna swap it, go ahead and swap it out, then the city already owns that property. That's my opinion. If it's capital, and again, I heard, but I was wrong that we had set aside $2 million for the particular project. So what I'm thinking now, we never did set that aside. And the only thing we did set aside was $200,000 for design, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Gilbert. Councilman Byrd, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And Donna and Blythe, I don't know whoever can answer. I was floored today and yesterday and today when I heard that, it was just 200,000 because honestly, I got to do some research on it. I was under the assumption that it was $2 million that was voted on it, put aside. And then we took 200 of that, 2 million was going to be for design. So it just kind of took me back to say that, wow, it was 2 million there and 200 of it is going to be used for design, but the 1.8 million can go away. And now looking at it is that it's not there because it wasn't secured. And it just seemed like that should have definitely been secured and been there for whenever the time. If they would have came in, Tiffany and the coalition would have came in and said, hey, yes, we're ready to go today. The $1.8 million is not there. The design is there, but the 1.8 million was gone. So that kind of sets me back a little bit. I'm really still confused and don't understand how that happened or the process. Blythe tried to explain it to me, so thank you, Blythe, for that. But I just still didn't receive it well. And then even now, after July, after the meeting is done, and say the coalition, because right now I'm looking to start a campaign because that was one of the things I agreed was to try to save the park or try to save the history of Lincoln Park. That's why we changed the name of the street to Lincoln Park Lane, because I wanted to try to get this going and just save that history. After the meeting in July, if the coalition is say, okay, with connecting the city and going ahead doing the park and the road by them both being attached to each other, what does it look like moving forward? Because back to what Councilman Gilbert's saying, if we don't own the land and they say, hey, let's go ahead and move forward with the road, with the park, then we start to do the design and we don't have it 100% or MOU put in place with Erlanger saying that, yes, we're going to give you guys the land to finish this out. I mean, it's likely that that can end up a parking lot because right now they're parking on it and they're in the landlocked with Erlanger. So I just don't want to kick the can down the road. Can we see this happening in the next 8 months before we all start to leave office? If we leave?
Well, let me say, Councilman Byrd, I totally understand your frustration. When the discussions began, as I recall, and we had a big press conference on the tennis court with the CEO of the then CEO of Erlanger and the mayor and all of us and community members, folks who were 2 and 3 generations removed from the current Lincoln Park neighborhood. They were in full support of it, excited about it. And you all know the history of the swimming pool and tennis court and the baseball that associated with Lincoln Park. And the city, Mayor Berg and the council very wholeheartedly supported the redevelopment of the park. And of course, if you're going to spend $1.8 million to develop a park, you need to have a plan. And of course, you want to have as much community, as much quantity and quality community engagement before you spend $1.8 million. So at that time, the $200,000, as I recall, was allocated, and the intent was to put in the capital budget $1.8 million for the execution of that plan. But then things started unraveling based on the coalition and coalition's response to what was they considered to be proposed for the road expansion, and different things started splintering off. But the biggest thing that we're dealing with is that once the coalition filed the I don't know what the correct term is, Blythe, you can help me with that. That essentially put a halt to any transfer of land until this is resolved. So some of the things that we were planning to do can legally not be done until is it the Nepa process, Blythe, or some subsequent process? What we were planning to do can no longer be done. The timing wise, we can't sequence the events the way we had intended to.
So the perception, I guess, of that $1.8 million I'm not being funny at all, but it's just an illusion, or now it's like, depending on COVID, depending on whatever goes on, that money may not be there to even do the park.
Well, and I may be overstepping here, but the 1.8 million won't even be necessary until we get to the next steps of the process that have been altered as a result of where we stand with the opposition of the coalition. It's not as though this council or previous council or this administration said we were going to allocate $1.8 million and never did it. That $200,000 was intended to have been utilized for the planning of the park, and then the subsequent year, that $1.8 million would have been allocated for the park. But the planning hasn't happened, and we cannot do a land transfer, as I understand it. And again, Mr. Bailey, this is more as a result of what's going on with the road. The process that we have to follow to legally be compliant and not lose our federal funding for the road, my understanding is the process we would typically use in a real estate transaction cannot be followed without us being subject to missing out on federal funding. And Mr. Bailey knows more about that than I do.
Right.
I'm happy to add a little bit to that, but because the park was identified by the keeper of the National Register as being eligible for the National Register, the purpose of the meeting we are trying to schedule in July is to develop a mitigation plan. And our partners at TDOT are playing the role of sort of independent guider of this project. And they stressed to me that we have to do the mitigation in the mitigation meeting and not in this setting. But it is possible that we could be in a better situation than what Donna is describing, but simply because there potentially are mitigative elements that actually obligate us to complete the park that could be developed, that could allow us to proceed more quickly than we had originally planned.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Justin Steinman has his hand raised. Did you want me to bring him in?
Yes, please do.
Sure.
Because he deals with capital, so he can add to this, I'm sure.
It would seem so.
Yeah. So Justin, unmute, please, sir. There
Yes.
you go.
Oh, sorry, bear with me. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we got you.
And I initially raised my hand a while ago, so it may be that your all's questions are answered at this point, but just wanted to kind of speak to the CIP and the 1.8 million. As you all know, each year when we adopt the capital budget, and actually what's being voted on tonight is, it's presented as a 5-year budget, but really we're just voting on the given fiscal year in each year. So you're voting to adopt the FY21 budget and then voting to adopt the next 4 years of that as kind of a recommended plan, but it's not binding. And so a lot of the time what happens, and you could see this with all kinds of projects, not just Lincoln Park, in previous CIPs, is as conditions change, or maybe as something goes slower than anticipated, or another project comes in over budget and needs more funding, we end up moving things around to make sure that the things we've already started can keep moving forward, and that we don't end up with projects that are partially done and no way to finish them. And of course, in any given year, we're always going to have to look at what our most immediate needs are. And I think when it came to Lincoln Park, it predates me a little bit, but I also know that we knew that with Central Avenue slowing down, that the immediate need for construction of Lincoln Park was also going to slow down. But I can say with certainty from conversations with the mayor and others that, we are committed to funding the 1.8 million to build a great Lincoln Park for the Lincoln Park neighborhood. And that even though it's not currently allocated, it is something that is definitely on our radar, and that I just wanted to make you all try and set your minds at ease that for certain it's not something that we're going to let fall through the cracks or go unfunded.
Okay, thank you. Hold that thought. Councilwoman Coonrod, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I looked in that budget year when we came in, the 2017-18 budget, when we first got here, probably the first ones that we voted on. And it says that it was 200,000 for Lincoln Park open spaces to design and renovate the park, with the possibility of the 1.8 million that I guess that now they're saying that was never allocated or we didn't vote on it. But the thing is, I would have been more appreciative if somebody would have said timeout when that was being said and passed around, to say then that's simply not true. This is why it's not true, because now it's been misleading to the community that we've been saying all this time, hey, we're getting $2 million from this park. I think Councilman Byrd has been working hard on his promise to constituents to save Lincoln Park. And although that is in his district, all of us should be speaking up about it, because it's Chattanooga history. It's the history of Chattanooga. This park is the last remaining thing that's showcased some form of Black history in Chattanooga. Everything else been wiped off. I mean, we don't even have a plaque or nothing to say, well, we came in through the slave trade, which is sad. We should be having it at the train station, the train depot. It should be down on Ross's Landing, all of that, but we don't. Our history is fastly being removed from out of Chattanooga, and it's really sad. But the thing is that we're saying like that's a priority. Unless we can get it in the next budget cycle under the mayor and this administration, we don't know if it's a possibility that whoever the next mayor is will even care enough to say that we want to make this a priority. That's the thing. We don't know who our next mayor will be. It could be Bob from Sand Mountain. He may not care. But the thing is this, is that whoever may be still left on council, hopefully that'll be the conversation that can continue on. Like right now we're in a crisis and we're saying, hey, well, we just don't have the money. But when I think about, we came up with the money to make sure that, what's that Parkway or whatever, Patton Parkway, we put our part of the dollars with that. When something else came in, we matched the private dollars with that and say we're gonna go and we're gonna put our funding with that. But again, just like the same argument we had with Ed Johnson, why aren't we making these projects priority when it comes to Black people? That's just the conversation. Like, I mean, we keep talking about it and talking about it, but nobody is saying we're gonna go ahead and get this done. We're gonna put the money in there. If we gotta put some of it in this budget and some in the next budget, I think it's only right. Black people are we already been beat down, kicked down, and all of that. All we're saying is let's preserve a park. To me, that's not asking for much. I'm asking, hey, can I get a park even on my side, on the other side of the tunnel? That's not asking for much. We already begging for equal, equitable economic development investment in our district, in the Black communities. So, I mean, right now it's no excuse for it. Like it's really a slap in the face that says to us, to Black people, we don't care about you and your parks or anything that you want to have. We got other things we want to put our money into.
Thank you, Councilwoman Coonrod. Councilman Gilbert, you have the floor again, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm kind of confused on a little thing. Ms. Donna Williams?
Yes, sir.
You said that because of the historical part, they could not move forward until that get resolved, correct?
Because of the historical elements associated with the road expansion. Yes, sir.
So this might be a question for Daisy. So why did we put $1.7 million for this 3rd Street road if the historical stuff is not settled yet? Because what I'm saying is that we didn't put 1.something million inside the budget for Lincoln Park, but we did put in that budget for that road.
Councilman, the 3rd and 4th Street project is a different project with different contexts around it. It's already through the Nepa phase and is in the design phase. It's actually getting into the right-of-way phase this year. So it's ready to move to construction, which would explain the funding that you're referring to.
So you're saying that it's ready to go, right? Because the Nepa project has been okay, correct?
Well, there's multiple phases in a federal project, and the 3rd and 4th Street project is farther along than the Central Avenue project. The Central Avenue project is still in the Nepa phase, and the 3rd and 4th Street project is actually, I believe, is almost in the right-of-way phase, which is the last phase before construction.
So 3rd Street and 4th Street is not in the Nepa area, correct?
Nepa is a phase. It's the environmental phase where you have to show how the project affects all the environmental resources, air pollution and noise pollution and history and everything. It's through that phase. It completed the Nepa phase, I'm going to guess, about a year ago.
So this area where Lincoln Park is has been okay to put that street there, correct?
3rd and 4th Street project is in a different location. It is nearby, but it is in a different location. It's farther west than the Central Avenue project. It does not impact the Lincoln Park resource.
So Central Park, I think we got 1.something million for that project too. Is that part of this?
Central Park, you mean Lincoln Park?
No, I got something. You got Central Avenue, right on there. So what I'm asking is these roads being okay? Are we okaying for Lincoln Park? Crickets.
Can you explain the question again, Mr. Councilman?
What I'm trying to figure out is that the holdup was of the historical part. And these projects that we are already in capital, are they tied in any kind of way near or next to Lincoln Park? That's a yes or no.
Central Avenue is tied to Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park is a historic resource that Central Avenue has been deemed to affect. So they are inextricable as they develop.
So the money that we talking about right now that we might pass, that area is somewhere close or right next to Lincoln Park.
Correct.
So again, going back to what I just said earlier, if that's the case, why didn't we not put money into Lincoln Park as we did for this road? I know it's not your question, but it's part of somebody else's administration. Why we didn't push forward for Lincoln Park as we did for this street?
Councilman, I may be able to answer a little bit of that because I think I understand your question. 3rd and 4th Street, of course, are in close proximity to Central Avenue. They intersect Central Avenue. 3rd Street intersects Central Avenue. During the NEPA phase, there was no opposition. There was no additional steps to speak to whether or not that road design would impact any historical elements. So during the NEPA phase, none of that was presented, and the NEPA phase continued. The process continued, but during the NEPA phase for Central Avenue, the historical elements, the relevancy of them, and the status of them, etc., was raised, and that has added additional time and processes to the process. But the 3rd and 4th Street, that it went through the NEPA process without any additional steps being needed.
But we put money into Central Avenue now. It's in the budget, capital.
Correct, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Bailey, but that project, I think he said, is through all their legal processes or federal processes, and it's ready to move forward.
Chairman Oglesby, I would remind us we are at a quarter till of our next meeting.
I just want, can you give us a report on something? Because it don't make sense that we got Central Avenue ready to go, but we don't have Lincoln Park ready to go. We haven't even went to the phase of even getting the property to go, and we already got Central Avenue ready to go. Something don't add up. And also, in Littlefield's administration, did they put any money for Lincoln Park?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
That's a basic question.
Councilman is Justin Steinman. There's no other money I've been able to identify in the capital budget for Lincoln Park besides the existing 200,000.
So us to know that there's nothing in there from past administration, correct?
Not that I've been able to find.
What about?
I mean, I've looked at all active there's no capital cost center that seems to be related to Lincoln Park except the existing one that has 200,000 in it.
I understand. I feel more comfortable because Daisy has been here since probably the city opened up almost, so she know where all the money is. So hopefully, Daisy, you know you're listening. Can you give an answer to that either now or later on?
Daisy?
Should I?
Yeah. Would you pull her up, Lydia, please?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure I'd answer you, Gilbert, after that.
Yeah, really. And then once Daisy give that answer, they're gonna look like they're having this meeting in July. So we'll have another one of these conversations in July once they can confirm the next phase of it. Miss Daisy, you have the floor.
I have. Would you repeat the question, please, to make sure I answer it?
Any money in the Littlefield's administration was allocated for Lincoln Park? Any funds, any money?
Was any money allocated for Lincoln Park during the
In Littlefield's administration time?
Well, actually, I think Blythe and Donna has addressed the fact that we allocated, I think it was a couple of $100,000. I have to go back and look, but that wouldn't be any different. That wouldn't be anything different out there. And I think what is confusing to people is the fact that the 5-year capital plan is just that. And you are required to follow up every year after that. But other than that, it was the design.
I understand that $200,000 in Andy and Caramera and the Burst time. I'm saying it wasn't any money in Littlefield's time that was allocated for Lincoln Park. I mean, that's a yes, or can you look for?
The answer is I don't know. I'd have to go check. That's been a while.
I would check and see for sure, so we feel more.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Miss Daisy. Okay, Councilman Gilbert, we'll be 18. We're going to be having another conversation relative to Lincoln Park next month when Blight alluded to the fact that they have a mitigation meeting that's going to be going down. So we'll need to get an update on what happens from there. So Donna and Blight, thank you very much for this presentation. We look forward to our next conversation as it relates to Lincoln Park so we can go and get this thing taken care of. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for ECD. So we are
First,
adjourned until
wait.
6 o'clock. Go ahead.
Erskine, I had a
All right.
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Demetrius.
Yeah,
Go
thank
ahead.
you.
Yeah.
Russell. Russell, because you were here on council doing Littlefield administration. You don't have your budget book? You could pull that out and go back and visit.
I don't have with, no, I don't remember keeping that budget book, but that's where I asked Daisy to go back and look at it. I'll recall some money, but I'm not for sure. That's where I want to look.
Council, we really need to shut this meeting down so that we can take a break and come back at 6 o'clock for Councilman Vice Chair Smith's ability to get it closed down and then rebooted. Okay.
Okay.
So at this time, we're going to end our meeting. Vice Chair, if you would end us, and that way we could rejoin.